Sup, it's Greggatron. This, 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 this. Look at it. Yeah. Yeah. Look at it. This. Yeah. 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 This is how are y'all? And do you like my shirt? Yeah. Alright. Today's video, I'm talking about this. Alright. So, a good friend of mine, Tar Baby Yoda, asked me, "Hey, Greggatron, why do you like Venom so much, man? Why Venom? Out of all people, right?" I told him, you know what? I'll have to make a video about this. Because there's just too much going on. I can't say it in the chat. So here it is, buddy. When I was a kid, I used to watch Spider-Man, X-Men, Batman, all that stuff from the 1990s. Spider-Man was always one of my favorite shows, one of my favorite superheroes. Well, Venom came along in one of those episodes. And ever since the Venom saga, this is 5 episodes, by the way. Ever since that happened, life has never been the same. So Spider-Man was kind of the ideal hero at the time. You could say Superman too, but Spider-Man was the show I watched probably the most, besides those other 2 shows I mentioned. Spider-Man, X-Men, Batman, and Gargoyles being number 4. So, he was the ideal superhero. And then when Venom came along, he was just the pro-anti of that. Everything Spider-Man stood for, Venom wanted to just tear that down in his personal life. I like Venom because he has all of Spider-Man's strengths and really none of his weaknesses. He does have a weakness. We'll get into that later, but he resembled Spider-Man. He had the spider on his chest. But he was huge, he was big and strong and beefy. And he just looked physically terrifying. Physically, he was just a menace. Eddie Brock was already like 6 foot, 6'2". Well, then when the symbiote wrapped around him in the animated series, he appeared to be, 6'5" or whatever. But it really formed around him in a great way. And they showed Eddie Brock's muscle in the show as a cartoon. And I loved that. Because they actually showed this man bench pressing, working out in the gym. And that inspires me 20-something years later to get swole. But they showed this man training back in the day. Then he turns into Venom. I'm like, that's so dope. So physically, he was stronger than Spider-Man. His webbing was stronger. He was faster. This man could turn invisible. This man could shapeshift. Venom could do all that stuff, man. Basically, anything Spider-Man could do, he could do better. On top of that, he knew Spider-Man's secret identity, Peter Parker. What made Venom such a great villain was not just the physical aspect, because there's always villains out there who are stronger. That just means the hero needs to be smarter, which Spider-Man does, and that's what Todd McFarlane intended. Whereas in this case, not only was he a physical threat, but he was like a psychological threat, like a mental threat, like a he could come to my house threat. And that's exactly what Venom did in this show. He showed up at Aunt May's doorstep. He showed up to Mary Jane Watson's play, pretending to be this normal guy. Spider-Man knew he was a threat, but he was doing that stuff to show Peter, yo, I can pretty much do whatever I want. I can sit on your couch if I want to. I can hang out in your living room. I know where you live. I know where you work. I know who's close to you. All of that. And the things he would say in the animated series, he would say stuff like, you'll see us everywhere, even in your nightmares. And I really like the voice actor who did that, because he did such a good job of making the character just terrifying. And I remember talking about Venom at school with other kids, and we loved that stuff, man. So he was physically a threat, and he was mentally a threat. What I liked about Venom was the way he was created. He was like spawned out of hatred. Hatred for both Peter Parker and Spider-Man. The symbiote hated Spider-Man, and Eddie Brock already hated Peter Parker from the job. So Eddie Brock pretty much blamed... Well, actually, Eddie Brock hated Spider-Man. Yeah. Eddie Brock blamed Spider-Man. I got it backwards. Eddie Brock hated Spider-Man because he blamed Spider-Man for him losing his job. And then the symbiote hated Peter because Peter rejected it. So when they got together, that's what formed Venom. That's how you get the tongue hanging out the mouth and the we instead of I. And that's how it became something different, opposed to just another individual with a black suit. It's just so interesting. Like, I read in the comics that Eddie Brock was a Catholic and he didn't believe in suicide. Yet at that church, that's what he was going to do that night until the symbiote found him. So the symbiote was almost like a way out of this darkness that he was in, just to fall into a different type of darkness and now go down this other path. But he turned into this whole different entity now that he was Venom. And I love that stuff because it really shows the nature of human beings, that we'll go from one thing to another just to try to escape from this. We'll go to that, not knowing we're still in the same hell. And as far as the symbiote goes, I thought it was cool how the longer Eddie Brock was Venom, the more and more kind of twisted he became. And he would get to the point where, and this is beyond just this, but he would get to the point where he was like stuck as Venom, like they were inseparable, which is much more dangerous because there's like no human left. In certain comics, there is no more Eddie Brock. And he said that in the cartoon, there is no Eddie Brock and there's no more symbiote, only Venom. It was crazy because this thing has such a hold on this man's mind because it used his hatred. And the symbiote will only do what you want it to do for the most part. Like, you're not just gonna kill somebody and then blame it on the symbiote. No, the symbiote might have pushed you to do it, but the symbiote only did it because you already wanted something to happen to this person. So it wasn't like you could just blame it on the symbiote. Oh no. It knows you because it can read your mind. So it was like this demon was attached to this dude. And I believe all the way down on the inside, Eddie Brock might be a good dude, but he was jacked up. Like everyone's jacked up. And he just used this symbiote as a vehicle, as a way to get himself out of his own self-destruction. But again, not knowing, now he's walking into a whole nother path of destruction. You know, there's a scene in the animated series where he like wants to get out of it. And there's a lady who really likes him, Dr. Kafka, I think her name was. And he's really feeling this woman. But the symbiote actually saw it. The symbiote saw her as a threat because the symbiote didn't want Eddie Brock to have anybody but the symbiote. Because once you're Venom, you're just Venom, like nothing else matters. So the fact that he even tried to live a normal life, the symbiote wasn't the symbiote wasn't trying to let that stuff happen. But that stuff is just so deep, man. Really deep. I talked about Venom being a threat to Spider-Man both physically and psychologically, mentally. Almost psychologically in the same way the Joker is to Batman, kinda. Not really, but kinda. This man was such a threat that I know of. He's the only villain who actually had to move, like physically move and live in a different city from the villain, from the hero. There's instances like in Justice League how they can't really defeat Darkseid, so they just move him to a different dimension or or to a different planet. And they do the same time. I'm stuttering. I'm getting excited here. Let me slow down. They'll do the same thing with Galactus. They're like, well, he's a giant. He's all powerful. We can't really defeat him. We're just going to move him to this universe and then wait till he comes back. That's like Venom in the sense that Spider-Man and Venom, they were both too big for New York City. So that relationship would have never worked out. Because even after they had to work together, which they hated, by the way, even after they had to work together to defeat Carnage, after all that BS was over, they still hated one another and they still saw each other as a threat. So there was a truce. They're like, look, you know everything about me. I know everything about you. We know where each other lives. I know where you work and vice versa. We're basically never going to stop hating each other. So I guess they shook hands and there was a truce. Whereas Venom then left and went to San Francisco. Because physically, it was just too dangerous for Venom to live in New York. Not too dangerous necessarily for Spider-Man, but for Venom as well. Because Spider-Man was to the point where he's like, if I see you again, I don't know what I'm going to do to you. Because Spider-Man knew what Venom was capable of. So it's almost like Spider-Man didn't even trust himself to be around Venom. So he's like, we just need to separate. Like, that's the only time I've ever seen anything like that. in comic book history. Like, you have different villains: Rhino, Shocker, Kraven the Hunter, Chameleon, Scorpion, whatever. Those are the guys you just throw them in jail. Kingpin, he's in and out of jail. He's a gangster. You know, what's the other one? Chameleon, Mysterio. These guys just go to jail. Dr. Octopus. But Venom was the only Spider-Man villain, maybe besides Green Goblin, even more than him. Venom was the only villain who was so damn evil and dangerous. That's the word I want to stress, dangerous. He was the only villain who Spider-Man had to physically separate from, because that's how much of a threat he was. You know what I'm saying? Furthermore, when I got older, I read the comics. A lot of those are really good. I started to see Venom more and more in video games and toys and different things. So I was promoting Venom from a young age. You can ask my siblings. They'll tell you, Greg used to pretend to be Venom. You know what I'm saying? Fast forward, I went to the mall years ago, like 10 years ago, at Hot Topic. And they had these Venom and Carnage Halloween masks. I was like, I need that. That's where this comes from. Happy Halloween, right? But I was wearing this off and on for years for Halloween. And then once I got swole, it fit me even better, because people actually like believed it. Like, kids were like, yo, mom, look. It would actually scare people. I would physically scare people because I'm big and swole, and I would wear that mask only on Halloween. But it got to the point, one year I went to Walgreens with it on, and the cashier said, you need to take that off. Or it was Walgreens, and it was a gas station also one time. You need to take that off. You're scaring that little kid. That little kid, he thought it was the stuff. He's like, Mom, look. I was scaring the cashier, not not the kid. The kid thought it was the stuff. Well, then fast forward, COVID happened, then everybody was wearing masks. And the gas station. And Walgreens. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Because a few years ago, they told me I can't do that. Now everybody's wearing a mask everywhere. Oh, okay. All right. But it's cool because the mask is treacherous. And whenever I wear shirts like this, I said in a different video, I feel strong. Even when I'm in the gym, I have Venom stuff in my gym. Venom actually inspires me to get physically stronger. Now, he's a character who's built on hatred, and I dropped my hatred, so I'm not about that hate. So if you take the hatred out of it, like, yeah, he won't be Venom probably. He'll just be this normal guy with a suit. But I can take the good from Venom and leave the bad. But Venom kind of is kind of like my alter ego. And I kind of use that to incorporate into Greggatron. Now, Megatron, that's Transformers. That's something totally different, obviously. But I use Venom as the Greggatron logo. Because that's my boy, too, Megatron and Venom. I always wondered, like, what would happen if Megatron got a symbiote on him? How dope would that be? As far as the psychological aspect, I'm just fascinated in how he kind of lives his life. I talked about how he inspires me when I'm in the gym. But, like, on a personal level, there's comics where it appears that he's talking to himself. And the people around him is looking like, who was he talking to? They think he's a crazy person. And then Eddie Brock's like, just mind your, I was about to cuss, mind your D business. Mind your business. One thing I like about Venom also, even back when he was in New York and San Francisco too, he, in his mind, truly believed he was doing the right thing. Say what you want about there always being a good guy and a bad guy. Venom, in his mind, was so twisted. He truly believed Spider-Man was the villain and that he was the hero. And one thing about Venom, he didn't go out like robbing banks and stuff like that. No, he just wanted to seek revenge on Spider-Man for what he believed was persecuting him. His whole purpose, his whole existence was to destroy Spider-Man. And despite that, somehow he still wanted to help people or be the lethal protector, one might say. Even though he was created from hate, he still ended up being a good guy in his own way. He truly believed he was the hero, and he would go around, quote unquote, helping people or trying to help people in the way he thought made sense to him. This man was in the sewers helping out homeless people. Like, some of the Venom comics, they're like Spawn, because it's both Todd McFarlane. Some of those comics are pretty dark. And how he would go up against people like Ghost Rider, The Punisher, Juggernaut. He had a lot of good books. But I like how he didn't view himself as the villain. But if anybody brought up Spider-Man's name, he would get upset or mad. Or if there was like a billboard with Spider-Man's pic, if there was a newspaper, he would ball that stuff up. But he would actually tell people, like if someone said something good about Spider-Man, he'd be like, what are you talking about? Spider-Man is the enemy. So that's how deep he was into his own hatred. And that's another reason why I like Venom. Because as far as the hatred thing goes, I talked about how I dropped my hatred, but I used to have that same hate that Venom has. So I can actually see the before and after. That's what makes this so deep. Because I used to be in a swimming pool of hate. I used to hate my fellow man, ex-friends, family members, co-workers, whatever. Like, I used to have a hateful heart. So I know what Venom is thinking, quote unquote. Because we all have that hatred. We all have that anger. Everybody's evil until they overcome evil, right? So that's why I say Venom is such a great villain, because he's a metaphor for hate. But on the inside, he's a human being who wants to overcome the hatred. He just doesn't know how, because the symbiote won't let him. But that's just how deep that stuff is. I could keep talking, but I think you get the gist. The dude is crazy. He's crazy, but he doesn't know he's crazy. I like the way he talks. I like the way he says stuff. In his head, the stuff makes sense. But when we're listening to it, it's like, what did he say? Physically, he's superior. His abilities, the speed, the strength, the trash talking. I mean, there was a comic book where he went in Mary Jane's home and just terrorized her. He was pretending to be Peter, and she thought that it was Peter until she found out it wasn't him. And like he could have killed her, but he's not about that. He just wants to make Peter's life hell. So he actually like terrorized her in her home. And then Peter gets home and she's like crying, makeup running down her face. It was horrible. It was horrible. And he's like, "What happened? What happened?" And she's like, "I thought it was you, but it wasn't you." And like Spider-Man snapped. Spider-Man went off when he found out Venom was in his home. It's like every ingredient you need for a good villain, Venom has it. He's got the motive. He's got the powers. He's got that vindictive spirit. He has the aspect of, I'm the good guy, you're the bad guy. I'm right here, you're not right. I mean, the dude is just insane. And then when we find out Carnage is a thing, we're like, how can there be something out there worse? Who is calling my phone? Hold on a second. That's a spam call, man. Anyway, I was saying, you see him evolve in the sense that he can't be stuck in that same hatred. Because they did have to work together to defeat Carnage. And even after that's over, even after they separate, he still has to adapt. You know what I'm saying? Another thing I like is he was Venom for so long. Once they have to separate Eddie Brock from the symbiote, once they have to separate, it's like, and there's a book about this, it's called Separation Anxiety. Like, they can't be without each other. The problem is, if he continues to be Venom, he'll die. Because Eddie Brock had cancer, right? But it was like, it got to the point where it was like a love-hate relationship. He couldn't live with the symbiote anymore because it wasn't good for his health. But it's like he didn't know what to do without the symbiote either. So you could call that a metaphor for relationships too. Because there were books where he would call the symbiote like love or whatever. Because for the longest time it never had a name until the recent comics, which I'm not a big fan of. Which I won't get into here. It's a metaphor for so much stuff. Whether it be a relationship or a friendship, hating your fellow man, trying to do the right thing regardless, not being able to do the right thing. I mean, it's crazy, man. But I never thought of any other villain like this, like Green Goblin, Doc Ock. They're all great villains too, but Venom was on a different level because of the way he wanted to antagonize Spider-Man. And even if you say, well, Carnage is better than Venom, Carnage is a bigger threat to society because he's a serial killer. But as far as Spider-Man's personal life, Venom was a bigger threat. You know, Carnage was just a straight murderer. There's no doubt about that. Carnage is like if the Joker had his own symbiote. But like I said, even after the Carnage stuff was over, I still like how Venom had to carry himself as far as being in a new place, being the lethal protector. You know what I'm saying? And there's other characters out there who I find interesting. Wolverine, Daredevil. the Punisher, Ghost Rider, Deadpool, Moon Knight, Blade, Spawn. The list goes on, right? But I think Venom is the most interesting out of all of them. We can debate this. Magneto, we can debate that. But Doctor Doom, it's all debatable, but I think Venom's the most interesting because of the mental aspect. You got two personalities, and in some case more than that, going on based off of hate. Yet, he still believes he's the hero. Anyway, it's been 30 minutes. I could keep talking. I'm not going to do you like that. Peace.